Studio, Brad White, the Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. Brad, thanks for coming in today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be with you.
All right, so I think what a lot of folks around the state keep seeing and hearing is just being showered with money from the federal government, and a fair amount of that is earmarked or designated specifically for use in what you guys do at MDOT. So give us an update on that. What does all that mean?
Yeah, well, the good news is, as we've stated in previous shows, our state has a lot of needs out there to be met in the way of rehabilitation of our existing system, as well as projects that have been identified in the way of capacity projects to be built to help alleviate traffic in areas where the volume has just exceeded the capacity that roadway may have. So the reauthorization of these funds and the plush up of these funds will come at a good time to help us better address the needs of the state. But, we've had, I guess it's 3 different economic stimulus packages that have come through that have transferred money from the federal government to the states to be doled out in a way of trying to stir up economic growth or help individuals deal with the effects of COVID. Mm-hmm. And so I think that by virtue of those packages that have gone out, there has been a misunderstanding where some have thought that this would be a similar type package, where when they would hear the figure $3.3 billion over 5 years for roads and bridges, that was going to be some other type of federal program that would send money that would sit in an account and then be appropriated out for certain projects. In reality, what this is what I think I would classify the Investment and Jobs Act as a omnibus bill of sorts that took the various authorization acts, that helps fund different modes of transportation, highways, all that, under one umbrella, reauthorized the expenditure of those funds from these federal agencies, and then added to it a little more money. Okay. And to give you an example of that, we are going to have over 5 years the $3.3 billion that has been mentioned, but we were already anticipating, based on the last 5-year authorization, at least to about $2.6 billion of that. So we are getting a little extra money that will be put to good use, but all of this are funds that will be run through the existing programs and categories and the formulas that are used through federal highway to administer all of the dollars. So like anything that comes from the federal government, it's got different strings attached to it. So these programs are directed to things like that have very specific scopes of work, classifications of routes. They're directed to areas with certain population thresholds. They have performance targets on them, many of whom, if those performance targets go unmet, come with pretty hefty penalties that are levied. So the manner in which the funds are spent they don't give us a whole lot of flexibility. So this is going to be somewhat different from just a package or a pot of money, so to speak, that would come down just to be kind of spent however we would cherry pick and spend, if that makes sense.
So they get down to that level of granularity on these kind of funds.
Yeah. Normally, MDOT's budget for the last, 10 years or so has been pretty level at about $1.2 billion, with a little better than half of that being federal money.
Right.
And I think if you followed like a kind of a flow chart of where the money goes, the commissioners end up with about $400 million that they would have discretion over how it's spent. But even that $400 million is discretion within certain categories. I mean, you have your paving needs, you have your capacity needs, you have your bridge needs, you have your safety needs, you have other geometric improvements like passing lanes or climbing lanes, things like that can be put in to try to improve the flow of traffic, all of which serve in their own certain area, and this money is spent in that manner.
So there's buckets essentially that are designated for the amount that the commissioners have discretion over, and then they decide within those specific buckets on specific projects, I guess.
Right, and the other good thing, in my opinion, it's a good thing, is by using all of these formulas, it's pretty data driven. For example, even with the capacity projects, the legislature created the Vision 21 law, where in order for a project to be listed as a capacity project, it has to meet certain criteria in an effort to try to remove the politics from it. The same way in choosing where we rehabilitate pavement, there's a universal formula that DOTs use where we're able to determine when the pavement's in need of being repaired before it starts getting into a declining state and trying to do that. Where our problem has been is we've had more needs and where we've had funds to try to adequately address them. In the way of rehabilitation, I think it's about a $400 million a year gap that we have in our spending. On bridges, it's about a $50 million a year gap. So the extra money we'll get here will help. But I also would be remiss if I didn't point out that this is something our legislature has recognized, and through two different programs, they've helped supplement our budget. One is Emergency Road and Bridge Program, which have helped primarily local governments find the resources to deal with some of the crisis bridges and roadways on their systems. I think it was $250 million that the legislature put in through a bond bill in the first year, $90 million in the second year to go to that, which is all data-driven and competitive in nature and how it's spent. The lottery fund, which you're familiar with, has been used to rehabilitate the two-lane highways around the state that sometimes, due to the other formulas, get kind of secondary treatment maybe behind the larger highways. We've had, I think, in FY20, $70 million. FY21, we reached 80. And just in the first 4 months of this fiscal year, we're spending $44 million of lottery funds with a total of about 2,000 lane miles that have been rehabilitated around the state just in those 2.5 fiscal years. So that's all what I would say is a step in the right direction that the legislature has taken in funding and providing the resources needed, and hopefully with the wisdom being used in the spending of this extra funds that will come through these normal formulas, we'll be able to catch up even more. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of confusion, it's fair to say, Brad, that just by the public in general of how DOTD is funded, that's a separate fund from the general fund from a budgetary perspective and a spending and accounting perspective. And most of its revenue comes from fuel taxes and other fees and so forth that are designated specifically for that fund.
Yeah, with the exception of the lottery fund,
right?
It's all a special fund agency.
Yeah,
it's probably the largest special fund agency in the state,
right?
Primarily from fuel tax. That's been level now for 30 years, but we've got a bigger system and a more aging system than we've had before. So finding ways to free up revenue to adequately address the needs of our transportation system is one of the big challenges that we have. Obviously, one way is try to make efficiency measures to free up money.
Yeah.
And the other way is trying to find other ways to fund it, like the lottery money that's coming in. A third way is in times past, and the current legislature, I'm not criticizing, but in years past when the state would have lean years and they wanted to fund certain things, MDOT was viewed as a big place they could go and carve out money. So as a result of that, we have appropriations that are taken out of our money to fund other state agencies in the carrying out of their duties, which have very little to do with transportation. So we've had some meaningful conversations, I believe, with the legislative leadership in trying to rectify that as well, which can free up more money and make sure that what fuel tax we are collecting is truly getting to where it's supposed to go.
Yeah. Last I checked, I think we were third from the lowest in terms of the 50 states in terms of fuel tax. I don't know if you've looked at that lately. We're down there.
We're lower than the surrounding states.
Yeah.
But I mean, right now, gas is through the roof. I think that would be a horrible time to try to have that discussion of raising the fuel tax. And I think, speaking from my own philosophical views, our government has gotten into the business of funding so much that they're not really core functions of government, that the core functions of government have suffered as a result.
Totally agree.
Ask Sean Tyndall about the problems he's having at the crime lab or Burl Kane with hiring people to work at Parchment. And the same thing is holding here. But our number one challenge that we have at DOT is not the funding. It's being able to recruit and retain staff. When the 87 four-lane program was passed 30-something years ago, MDOT had the capable staff then, and the number of staff I mean by that a lot of the pre-construction that was put in to building those highways was done in-house. And we no longer have the number of employees and the capability of doing that type of work. Okay. And so we're paying out the wazoo to consultants to do about 3 times more what we could do in-house.
Which is more expensive.
So hopefully we'll have the flexibility to get some pay raises for our staff and build back up from that standpoint. In other words, the money doesn't